Hello, I'm Ksenia. I'm going to do like a nice, simple watercolor workshop with you today. Just introduce you to like a new way to use that medium and hopefully make something that will make you feel happy. Um, so I'm coming to you from my home today instead of the studio, which means the setup is like a little weird, but we will muddle through it and, try not to knock anything over and all that jazz. But the lighting is good and I've got all my materials, so I think we're ready to go. I also live with a couple of dogs. One of them is yapping right now. I don't know if you can hear it, but if you do, they're fine. There's just like something happening outside in the world that they really need to talk about. So take that as you will. Okay, so for this workshop, just gonna rotate the camera, put it down. Let's see how this works. Cool. So I realized after my last workshop that if I film from the left side, which is not the hand that I used to paint with or draw with or whatever, you'll actually be able to see what I'm doing better. So that's hopefully going to help you out. So to start, I have some watercolor paper. I had it pre-cut into small sort of postcard sized pieces. So that's what I'm working on. But you, of course, can work on paper as big or as small as you like. Much smaller than this might be like a little difficult for this particular technique, but like try it. Let me know how it goes. You don't have to use like super watercolor paper. You can use probably any kind of thick paper. We're not going to be like saturating it super much. So you should be fine to like use cardstock or cardboard if that's what you have around. But watercolor paper is always nice because there's like a little texture, a little tooth that the color can stick to a little better. We will use a brush a little bit. I have a large brush because I think I will put a background in one of my pieces. You certainly don't need to put a background. And if you have, paper that already has a background on it that you're just sort of like, if you have an image that's just sort of hanging around and you want to reuse that paper, we love reusing things. So you can absolutely paint this on something that's already got a wash on it or got a painted background on it. As long as it's dry, you could probably even paint this on top of acrylic or something if you wanted to. I also have a thin brush for later on. Just gonna, a little bit more rotation, there we go. But the major, I've got a cup of water, of course, and the major part of this workshop is actually using cotton swabs. So I have two different kinds. I have like the cushy kind, that's, like extra nice if you're using them for your body. But I actually suspect that for this, this less squishy kind will actually benefit us a little bit. But again, we're going to find out. So I have them in bundles of like 7 to 9. And I put a little elastic band around them. You don't have to put an elastic. You can also just hold them, but and it can of course be like a giant elastic that you wrap around 18 times. Also fine. There's so many adaptations you can make to make this work for you. It's really just like the Q-tips and some watercolor that create the technique. So and I've got a couple different kinds of paint. We're gonna experiment a little bit. So I have some watercolor in the little pots, the dry stuff that you add water to, and then I also have tubes. I know that the liquid watercolor will work for this, and I have faith that this will work, but we might need like just a little bit more adapting. So the more pigment rich your watercolor, the better. I have this set that I love because it has like all these beautiful colors in it, but the pigment in most of them is like a little bit wimpy. Like they are very, very soft watercolors, which is beautiful and really nice for a lot of things. For this one, you do want something a little more punchy. So there are like certain pots in here that, in the tray that I could use. But these ones in particular are like just a really pigment rich brand. So I'm gonna probably try that. And then of course the liquid tends to be quite saturated. So that'll help us out. I think we'll do like one version without a background and one with. So as I said, you're going to want to be painting wet on dry. If you're wet on wet, your shapes that, I'm sorry, I don't know an example that would make a lot more sense, but either what you're going to make with your cotton swabs will really melt if your paper is wet. So we're gonna want wet on dry. But since I have enough time to maybe do like a couple of these, I'm just gonna put like a quick background on this paper just for fun. So I'll use like this less saturated stuff, and I think I'm gonna do like a pinky bluey kind of thing. It's nice actually. I had at one point been thinking that I would do like a winter scene today for a workshop. And then it's going to be so nice out this week. It's actually supposed to be like 0 degrees Celsius or above for like the whole week. So I'll save the winter acrylic landscape for next week or the week after. And I was really excited to like do some florals because I'm sort of tricking my brain into thinking it's spring instead of going the other way around. So I'm just gonna do, I have maybe like a little too much water here. But you can do a background wet and wet, of course. That's where you just with your wet brush go over your paper first, and then wet your brush again, put it in the pigment, and bring that all over. I kept the paper dry. I just stuck my brush in some water and grabbed some paint and went from there. So this, see whether that dries. It's really curls. I always recommend taping your watercolor paper down if you're going to be working with it for any period of time. But for now, I'm just going to like roll it back because this background is not like super precious. Fun fact, if you have your paper curling, if you paint the other side of it, you can often convince it to uncurl because it's like the wet makes the paper curl up. So if you wet the other side, it'll curl the other way and it kind of balances itself out. But again, like I'm not super concerned about the background, so I'm just gonna leave that be. Okay, so this is rolling up my sleeves. She means business. This is the fun part. So these flowers are kind of like lilac shaped flowers. Of course, you can make them in whatever colors you want. I think to go with my like springtime feelings, I'm gonna do like some yellows and oranges. So your key here is that you're going to want to make your pigment quite wet. So I'm actually taking this yellow. This is like such a nice punchy yellow, and I'm actually bringing it up here. Put quite a lot of water on my brush. I'm bringing it there. I've got all the hinges on like everything I have that closes for my markers and watercolors are broken a little bit. That's what that like lovely clicking sound is. Put some there. I'm gonna put even like just sort of like scooping water with my brush. It would be very clever actually if I like brought my water over. There, so we have like a nice wet puddle. And of course, you know, you're not limited to just exactly the color that comes in your tray, right? You can mix and change it up. I'm going to start with this straight up yellow though, because I find it very nice. You're going to put your cotton swabs in it. We're trying to, I'm gonna wet my cotton swabs just a tad, just to like pre-wet them. I'm trying to soak up a fair amount of that pigment. And then we're gonna bring it onto our paper. This closer for you. And we're gonna start creating like a cone-shaped flower. Yellow was not my most clever choice to start with because it doesn't show up as well. So I'll do this yellow layer and then I'll go in with something like a red. So it's kind of, yeah, like as I said, like a cone. And you're going wider at the bottom and tapering it towards the top. I don't know if we can, oh, you can barely see that. I'm sorry, that yellow was like a poor choice. Let's go in with another color. Bad workshop instructor. I'm just gonna put like a lot of water right in this pot here and I'll soak it out with a paper towel later. I'm going to use the same side with the yellow and because it's not going to make it muddy to add orange. Oh, and see how that nice wet paint just like travels right up the cotton swab. Okay, let's try that. Oh, there we go. That will be more helpful for you to see. And I'm rotating my little pod of cotton swabs as I go. We've talked about this with the dandelion workshop I did a little while back, because you don't really ever want to, I mean, you might, but in this technique, you don't want to stamp the same shape over and over. You're like giving yourself a little bit of leeway. So see, it's like kind of like a little pointillism. So I've got like nice orange basis for a flower. I'm going to do one more cone at the back here coming up. And this is actually, like, of course, the more you dot with them, the less paint is left, right? So you get like slightly smaller dots or a slightly faded experience. And for me, I'm actually like really into that because it helps already to show that that second cone is off in the distance a little bit. It's behind. Okay, and you know, as long as you're not worried about getting paint on yourself there, you can certainly just flip these over and use both sides for the sake of conservation, which we love. I'm gonna do like a red orange. I'm not quite ready for straight up red. I'm gonna bring in some of the yellow that I've already got on there just to. I'm just gonna have to clean this out anyway, so going willy-nilly with my mixing. Ooh, that's a lovely color. I'm gonna get these a little wet again, dabble on a paper towel, and now we're going to soak up some pigment. Come on, pigment. Put it right in there. Cool. Okay, see how much it's just like sucking up that paint? And we're gonna go in on top. Let's give a little more depth. Sort of turning and tilting. A bit behind. Of course, you're welcome to do like a third one or one coming down or what have you. Okay. So that's what I've got so far. It looks kind of like fire actually, just because of those colors. Let's try this other shape of cotton swab. Need to get some yellow out of there now. Oh, these ones get very, very sticky. That's the thing. Super saturated, but very sticky. Add quite a lot of water. Nice like ochre golden yellow there. I guess it would help if more than one of the swabs was actually touching it. Come on, friends. Okay, so we've got like some yellow on there. I'm gonna go in. And again, it might not be showing up super well on camera, but it is adding a nice depth here in person. Okay, so let's say that I'm happy with that. And I would like to put in a little stem. So I don't like to really use necessarily my green straight from the container. And sort of to keep it in a similar palette, I'm actually going to use that yellow orange that I've already mixed and sort of bring some green into that. Just makes it like softer. I'm using a very thin brush, making it quite wet. And I'm just gonna put like a little stem coming up And because there's, you know, spaces in between your little blossoms here, if you want, you can carry that stem upward through the plant. Like so. I'm going to do a big ol' leaf to fill this sort of negative space here. So, is it realistic? Perhaps not. Is it working for me? I think so. Use flatter brush. This one's gotten quite crunchy, which is why I just have it soaking in there. Just do a nice like swipe for the leaf. Blend that. There. So there we are. That's one version. My little timer tells me it's been about 16 minutes, and a big chunk of that was me sort of explaining the technique to you. So very quick and easy floral moment. I'm just gonna fix the taper on that top one because it's bothering me a little bit, and then we'll try one more with liquid watercolor and see how that goes. Just feels like this sort of ends like very bluntly at the top, so let's there. I prefer that. Yeah, so that was 3 colors, and you know, of course, you could do more layers if you like. I'm thinking, of course, again, like there's no right answer. I enjoy the sort of like 3 or 4 interplay because you are thinking that this is one flower made up of tiny blossoms on the same plant, right? So you can, of course, make like a beautiful fantasy one that has all the colors of the rainbow. I would just caution, because the paint is wet, that if you're using like complementary colors, like if you were to have like a purple and a yellow together, then they sort of melt together and make a brown. So the complementary colors are red and green, purple and yellow, or orange and blue. Wow, in a little moment. So yeah, so you might get a little bit of that like brown factor unless you let every layer dry in between. So if you want to make like fairy tale flowers, that's totally an option. But if you are thinking like something that exists in nature, it would be sort of like, you know, a more limited palette of like 3 or 4 colors that would be next to each other in the color wheel, that kind of idea. Cool, so we'll put away this like hot summer flower, and I'm gonna see if my background is dry. That's why I made it so thin. And it is pretty dry. It's dry enough that nothing's gonna melt. So I'll leave it there for one moment, and I'm going to just make a little supply switch. So if perhaps if you haven't painted a background and you want to do that, now might be a really fun time for that. These guys are done. The thing with doing such a wet, not pretty. Look at that. A wet project is that everything's a little bit of a mess after, and you have to have room for it to dry safely. You can go over here. I'm just gonna mix in lids. If you have a palette with wells in it, that's another great opportunity to use it. But I don't ever clean my palette, so I actually only have like 2 empty wells right now. So that's less conducive to this particular project where you want something clean. So I'm using lids. Hooray for recycling. Okay, so I've made this like pinky periwinkle kind of background. And so for this version, I want to make something. I was going to say I want to make lilacs, and I'm making something resembling lilacs. So I'm going to use my liquid watercolor. This is not fancy stuff at all, but it does the trick for me, and that's great. So I'm gonna take some violet. Let's see what mauve looks like. I think all these blues are like fairly warm. Ultramarine is a super, super punchy blue. So maybe we'll do that, or maybe this cobalt is quite pretty. Yeah, so an ultramarine is quite a red blue. You probably can't tell because it's just like a teeny tiny thing. But yeah, quite a red blue, very, very saturated. The cobalt blue is, to my eye, more of a true blue. There's like a tiny bit more green in it. Ultramarine's probably a better tone. It's just like so loud. It overpowers some things. Yeah, let's live a little. So I'm going to put just a dot of ultramarine into here. And, you know, ideally you'd have clean water. I forgot to get a second cup of water. Just going to pour some into this lid. It's just like a little yellow in it. We'll be fine. I'm going to mix. So this is like a lot of water, which is good. Those cotton swabs are going to love all of that. I do have white lids so you can see the color better for some other ones as well. So heavily pigmented, sticks around forever. I've got it on my hand too. It's okay. I'm going to grab some of this mauve. I may not have ever used this mauve before, actually. I tend to like to mix my own purples, which you certainly can do. That's the nice thing about this too, is you don't need 24 different colors to be able to do something like this, right? You can just with your red and yellow and blue. Ooh, that's a lot of paint. See how that goes. You can certainly make any color that you might want for this, and you can do subtle variations, of course, as well. If I was, you know, not wanting to do the straight up ultramarine, I certainly could have added weight to it or added something to tone it. But in the interest of this being a technique workshop about florals and not about you watching me mix paint, we'll just use them straight out of the tube. So yeah, as I said, like, you know, ideally clean water. The purple with the little bit of yellow in it has the potential to get a little bit muddy, but because I have so much pigment, it's going to overwhelm the little bit of yellow in my water cup. So I'm not concerned. And there's a phone. The joys of working in a place where other people live. Fantastic. Okay, and let's mix the purple. Such a beautiful color. I love like blue violet. It's one of my favorite colors in the world. That and teal. Big fan. Okay, so that's nice and liquidy. What should we start with? I think I'm going to start with the blue because then I can layer on top of it. Yeah, look at that. See, so, I mean, of course, it's totally fine to work with those other, with watercolors and trays. But perhaps you might want to actually add like some water to this and then just keep scooping it in from your tray. That might actually be a more effective way. Because these swabs do pick up so much and we will get a bit of a different effect. And you see it's like kind of blobbing together a little more because these are the name brand ones, the cushy ones. And because they're so cushy, there isn't really space between them. So we do get some of that, which is completely fine. It's just a different way of doing things. I could have maybe afforded like a little less water in this particular color. It toned it down to a beautiful sort of periwinkle blue that I love the color of. There's sort of a, you know, two ways to change your your color of watercolor paints, right? One is to just water them down and make them less saturated in that way, or you can make them thicker and do a less watery paint in this same tone by like just mixing white with it. So I could have done less water and mixed some white with my ultramarine, and then I would have gotten like a similar hue onto my paper, but it would have been more like heavier body, if that makes sense. A little more saturated, but in the same hue. I'm gonna take my mauve and bring it in so you can see this has like mixing happening within it, which again, I really dig. But if that's not what you want, then you're going to want to be doing a slightly less wet version. I've let these ones sort of come off the page just because of where I placed them. I wanted to have like more room for the stem. I didn't quite taper it to finish at the top here. That's okay. So I'm quite liking that. I have the option of like leaving it and letting it dry a little bit, of course, if I want to. And we'll take this purple. And these ones are a little less absorbent. So I think I'm going to get, I'm going to get like more distinctive dots on top here. And again, because it's quite wet, we have like that bleeding of the color. Ooh, look at that. See, I'm essentially painting wet on wet right now with this. So the thing with wet on wet is your pigment is then carried by the water that's already existing. And I do have a little tiny bump in my paper because of the background. So that's pretty fun. It's a little bit different. I'm not going to lift it up right at this moment because it is pretty wet. So I'll like put a stem in and then we'll take a look at it, or maybe I'll just move the computer. So I'm going to go back to this stuff. I'm going to take, this is like quite a blue-green. So I'm going to take a little bit of that with a little bit of my ultramarine here. And put in my stem. And you see I caught a little bit of the dot there. So I've actually dragged the purple down into it, which is quite a pleasing effect. Take the blue, this blue-green kind of leaf. I'm just going to use my thin brush just for fun. Pull some green into it. So yeah, this is a much more like wispy kind of look. So it's really all up to personal preference. And of course I've shown you sort of like two extremes of like very wet liquid watercolor and fairly dry trays. But you can take more time too and play with it and see what discoveries you might make with that. And then just because I do have a couple of very, very wet spots, I'm actually going to use a cotton swab and just soak up some of that extra. I get a real kick of like seeing it travel all the way up the shaft of the cotton swab if you've got the ones that are paper in between. Yeah, you don't have to do this, of course. You could just leave it dry and you'd have like some beautiful darker patches. This is mostly just so that I can do this without wrecking it. And you can see that the dripping is actually starting already just from me holding it up there. So that's just another gravity helping me out with my artwork. I'll lay it back down here. I'll move these trays over so you can see a little bit what that looks like. I'm gonna try one more. It's only been 29 minutes, so I'll do like another quick little 5-minute one and we'll see how that goes. I'm really curious because these ones have like, they're for, you know, applying makeup and stuff. They have like a little spiky end. So I'm quite interested to see whether that's going to look different. So I am going to start with the blue again. Yeah, I could have maybe done a tiny bit less water and tiny bit more pigment in here. But you know, it's different every time. Okay, so this is, yeah, like very, very small dots. So I'm just going to use that to like sketch out the, you can't even see it there, sketch out the overall shape, like a little pencil. And I keep doing 2 flowers here, but of course you can do more than that. Let's see what it does. Yeah, these are like super small. Okay, cool. We learned something. I'll take more of these. I'm going to try them without an elastic. So without an elastic, when you're just holding them, they like splay out a little more, which means you have like a little less control, which could be a scary thing for you or could be a freeing thing for you. Let's see if I can, literally was just going to be like, I'm going to see if I can make these ones more distinct than the other one as an experiment. And then I put a huge clump of blossoms together. So the answer is no, not quite. What if I try 3? So this is nice too, right? To have fewer in your little bundle. And then you have, again, like just a little more control over where each color is placed. So I guess like really with all of my workshops in any technique or whatever, I'm always just like, whatever floats your boat really, right? Like the whole point is to learn like, oh cool, I hadn't maybe thought of making lilacs in a pointillism style with cotton swabs before. And now you have, and now you've seen one way to do it, and you can go make decisions about how you want to use that information. Yeah, just like blending in some blue here. And again, though, I am always like twisting my wrist ever so slightly. So these ones really like blend together. So what I might want to do is use my tones to make one more distinctive. So maybe I sort of want to bring blue in along that edge as though there's like a little bit more of a shadowy feel to this one in the foreground, and then the one in the background is more nebulous a little bit. For example, might have a different thought. Do a blue stem and leaf, and I'll bring some green just into that. Maybe I won't actually. Maybe I'll just keep it fantasy blue. Just add enough green to like give us a little teal to a wide side of my brush for the leaf there, and a more distinctive what's coming up. Grab just a tiny bit of green. Gosh, that stuff is so pigmented. I think I'd remember. Blending my green and blue here. And there we go for now. I'll just say that these lilacs are part of a bush, so they would have leaves all around them. Sorry, just a lot of silence in the scritching of the brush. There, okay. It's just a technique demo, Ksenia. I don't get too precious about it. Going to very slightly bring in a little bit of green that's nice and wet on my brush. Try to blend. I'm actually using some of that, in this case the blue, the ultramarine, where it is like very liquidy, and I'm almost using that as my water to carry the color as well. You know, watercolor is a fascinating medium with lots of different ways to use it. You can actually, on our YouTube page, it's either just been posted or will be posted tomorrow, an old workshop that was taught live at Studio Central where James went through some watercolor techniques with us, like the idea of wet and wet and different ways to blend and layer and some beautiful stuff like that. So if you want to find out more about watercolor, that's a great place to do it. I'm just looking for my, so yeah, I'm gonna wrap up. But so just as a reminder, this was our first one that was done with the watercolor from the tray, where we added water sort of just directly to the tray and scooped that in there. And that's not on a background. This one is still pretty wet on a background. And we used liquid, so it's quite a wet mix of watercolor there. And then here's one more, again with that same mix of watercolor, but applied with smaller bundles of cotton swabs, so you don't get quite as much, so it's more distinctive with the fewer cotton swabs, and they were further apart. So yeah, 3 ways to use cotton swabs in your floral watercolor painting. I hope you enjoyed. It's a nice quick way to make a little art card, or if you're adding something to a gift, nice and fast. You could write a lovely little message around it or on the back. Keep dreaming of spring. Enjoy the nice warm weather this week, and stay safe. Thanks, everybody.